Gospel is from the Gospel according to St. Luke, in the 17th chapter, beginning at verse 11. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. It was 15 years ago that I traveled to Palestine. And in the West Bank, the small group of which I was a part visited many sites of both ancient and present importance. We had stopped in Jenin, a town which has recently gained attention because of attacks by nearby illegal Jewish settlements. Settlers have launched pogroms, burning homes and beating residents. We met with members of the Palestine, or the Jenin Freedom Theater, and this was a group of dramatic artists who were helping children to find ways to express the grief and the disturbance that was characterizing their lives. We learned of their work with children and youth. The next morning we set out for a small village about 3 miles away, the village of Burkine. In this village is a Greek Orthodox church. It's the Church of St. George. Most Greek Orthodox churches in Palestine are named the Church of St. George, who slayed the dragon. And this particular church was built by St. Helena, who was the mother of the Roman Emperor Constantine. And after his conversion, she too was converted to the Christian faith and decided to build a church in Burkine. Well, this was approximately 1800 years ago, and the church still stands today on top of a cave. And the cave is known as the Cave of the 10 Lepers. The cave is actually an ancient Roman cistern. And you entered through a narrow door underneath the church. And in the interior of this cave, it was pretty dimly lit, even though it had been electrified and there were lights on the walls. You could imagine that in Jesus' day, there might have been 1 or 2 torches that lit this dark place. There was a small altar and several icons. It was a Greek Orthodox site. And the ceilings were rather low. And just past the altar was a stone baptismal font. Fairly crude, but hewn out of stone. And just past that was a small pool of water. And then you could look up. And maybe 40 feet up above was an opening in the ceiling. And that opening was where people would lower food and other needs to the lepers who lived in the cave. These poor, beleaguered human beings afflicted with leprosy. And nowadays we like to talk of them as human beings who were afflicted with leprosy, because leprosy didn't define their entire life. Much the way we don't like to talk about slaves, but people who were enslaved didn't define their humanity. Leprosy is a disease that bestows a double whammy on its victims, especially in the ancient world. First of all, there's the disease, which is characterized by necrotic symptoms. Tissue and organs become infected and die, caused by a bacterial infection. They didn't know anything about that in the ancient world, bacteria and infections and so on. But that leads me to the second whammy against these people afflicted with leprosy, was social isolation. The only way that they knew how to manage to live with lepers was to not live with them. And so there was the whammy of social isolation. They were not permitted to be with family, friends, and so on that they'd formerly known. And it's a strange thing. There are actually 2 whole chapters in Leviticus 13 and 14, that have over 100 verses that have to deal with what to do about people with leprosy, and how to treat them, what the priests are supposed to do, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of great detail in those 2 chapters, believe me. The social isolation was this verse 45 in the 13th chapter. It said, "The person who has leprous disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head look disheveled." Kind of like a rock star today, right? I wake up sometimes in the morning and I look at my wife and she sees my hair all over the place. She says, "You should be a rock star." Well, the person with leprosy had to wear disheveled clothes. His hair had to be in torn clothes. His hair had to be disheveled, and he had to wear a covering over his mouth, his upper lip. And then they were required, if anybody came near, to cry out, "Unclean! Unclean!" You can imagine what that would do to a person to have to, declare themselves that way. And it says that he shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Well, the disease was to be diagnosed by the priests, because priests were the most intelligent people in the community. I'm just glad that they don't ask me to do that, because I'm not the most intelligent person in the community, and I know nothing about diseases, a little bit, because I've had a few. So, anything that looked like a rash or an allergic reaction, that we would say, put some calamine lotion on it, you'll be fine. Hydrocortisone, so on. In the ancient world, you had to go to the priest, and he had to examine you. And the priests are told in Leviticus what leprosy is supposed to look like. But, almost any kind of skin contagion would be regarded as potentially leprous disease. Along with the social isolation was a sort of a subtext of the person must have committed some terrible sin to come down with this disease. You remember from the book of Job, right? His friends came and they said, well, you must have done something terrible to deserve this. And I think, that idea has never really gone away. If people have problems, illnesses, whatever, you must have done something wrong. You're being punished for, your illness. We've seen that time and time again, from COVID to AIDS to the Spanish flu to the Black Plague, so on. People who suffer must have done something bad. When the 10 men afflicted with leprosy called out to Jesus, "Jesus, have mercy on us," he replied, "Go show yourselves to the priests." They're the authorities on this matter. And they were healed. Priest didn't see anything wrong with them. On the way to see the priest, they were healed. But that's not why Luke tells the story. Jesus did lots of healing and so on in those days, but he tells the story because only one of the 10 came back to give thanks. And here was the kicker. He was a Samaritan. So he had the triple whammy. Not only had the disease, not only was socially isolated, but even in his isolation, he was a Samaritan, which was, sort of scorned in those days among the Jews. He prostrates himself at Jesus' feet. And he gives thanks. All 10 had presented themselves to the priest and pronounced cured. The one who returned was not only cured, but made well. Jesus says, "Your faith has made you well." There's a difference, of course, between being cured and being made well. To be cured is to have your symptoms remitted. To be well, in spite of the symptoms, is a sense of well-being and self-worth. A spiritual contentment and wholeness. That's why we love that hymn. It is well with my soul. Right? I was tempted to sing, but I won't bother today. 9 men were cured that day out of the darkness of the cave, and I picture them dancing with joy as they went on their way back to their homes and their families and so on. The Samaritan, however, came out of the cave and the darkness of his life. As an outcast, he returns to the light which emanates from Jesus. And he's not only cured, but made well. So he gets the double blessing. That day, as I stepped out of that cave where I imagined these men were left in darkness most of the time, I couldn't help but think of the verses from the first letter to Peter in the 2nd chapter. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had received mercy, and now you have received mercy again. Coming out is not an easy journey. It takes a certain courage. I've treated many people with all sorts of mental illnesses and circumstances of life that kept them locked up inside. And the great joy of my profession as a psychotherapist was to see them come out, to realize that they could be accepted for who they are, and they didn't have to hide anything anymore. And that's the lesson of the person afflicted with leprosy who came and gave thanks to Jesus for redeeming his life. Amen.